What is going on? It's Alex coming back at you with another video, and today we're going to be doing the last stock report voice crack that we are going to be doing this year, the best and worst performances from week number 14 in college football. Technically, we'll be doing it for the other season, or for the postseason, but we're still going to be, limiting those games because we won't be able to do every single one of them. So super excited for this. Thank you guys so much for going through every single week with me on this. I think we missed one, but that was because I was in a car accident. You guys know the drill on that one. But, just being able to do this every single week, even though it's the worst performing series on my show, it just allowed me to understand these prospects so much more, fall in love with these prospects so much more. And, I know that you guys, the few of you who do watch this series, you guys truly love it. And you know what? That makes a lot more sense for me to do it than just to get some views and some cash. So let's get into this, starting out with our all-stars of the week. And Travis Hunter is one of them. We actually have quite a few guys this week. It's going to be an expansive show because, well, you'll see. But, Travis Hunter, he did so well on both sides of the ball. Talk about a great way to end off your regular season career in college. And I don't think he's going to be playing a bowl game or anything, so I highly doubt that there's going to be that aspect to it, but this might be his last game in college. He ended up having, on defense, an 86 defensive grade, a defensive stop, 5 targets, 2 receptions allowed for 18 yards, but on those 3 other plays, or 3 other throws, if I may, he had an interception and 2 pass breakups. So, fantastic performance right there. Obviously, we know the ball skills are ridiculous with Travis Hunter. On offensive side, he proves it every single week, but it's good to see that he also ends up doing it on the defensive side as well. And on the offensive side, he did just as well. 14 targets, 10 receptions for 116 yards, and a beautiful hat trick, 3 touchdowns. And so, obviously, pretty much, you can't really do very much better than that. Great job for Travis Hunter, literally making an impact in every single phase of the game. It's pretty much, I have top 5. He's the number 1 pick pretty much at this point, but again, RNG is always the thing. So, next we got Dominic Zirowaku. I got to see him in person here at SMU a little while back, and, it's good to see that he's ending off his BC season on an absolute banger. 12 pressures, 6 defensive stops with a 91 defensive grade. You literally cannot build enough momentum or any more momentum than he just did. Even 13 pressures, 7 stops is just as daunting of a stat line as 12 and 6. You might say, oh, wow, it's better, but, legitimately, it's still an absolute jaw-dropper seeing 12 pressures from an edge rusher, doing a fantastic job there. I'm still a little bit worried about the translatability to the NFL, but, obviously, he's a really, really good player, someone who I really like, and, it's just, I don't know if he's going to get 12 pressures a game in the NFL. If he does, then he's worth a top 3 pick, but he might have pushed himself almost securely into the first round. It just really depends on if he's going to be going to the Senior Bowl, what he does there, and then also how he's going to perform at the combine, weight-wise, size-wise, as well as, the agility drills, because Zirowaku has some good bend to him, but I have one big issue with him, which is he tends to actually slip. So, that's just something that I really hope that we get to see on that 3-cone, an improved balance structure, and, I think that could be the difference between him being absolutely phenomenal and then potentially not. But I really do have a little bit more of an optimistic point of view on that. Just at the moment, I'm going to call it out as it is. Curtis Rourke bouncing back. He ended up being the dud of last week, and this week ended up doing fantastic for Indiana. 31 throws, 23 completions for 349 yards, 6 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, 3 big-time throws, 0 turnover-worthy plays on top of a couple of 2 runs for 10 yards. So good job for Curtis Rourke. I still think that the Ohio State game is something that you're going to need to study. I don't think Curtis is mainly responsible for it, but again, if you're going to be drafted in the NFL, you have to throw over 100 yards versus certain teams. That's just kind of a baseline. But, did a fantastic job this week. Definitely solidified himself with some good momentum going into the offseason. Then we have Jalen Walker, another Jalen Walker, linebacker out of Indiana. He's a unique build, but he's actually been included on studs and duds for me for a couple weeks out of this year, and this week is none different. He ended up performing with a 92 defensive grade, 6 pressures, 4 defensive stops, and he was targeted 6 times, allowed 3 completions for 26 yards, and he ended up getting a pass breakup on top of an interception. So, literally doing it as a pass rusher, as a run defender, as well as in coverage. That is a fantastic job. We'll see where he ends up going, but Jalen Walker, a fantastic player. Then we have Zamiah Vaughn. Zamiah Vaughn. There we go. Zamiah Vaughn, cornerback out of Utah. You guys know how much I love Utah defensive backs. Tao Johnson. I think his name's Smith Snowden, or it might be Snowden Smith. I don't know. But regardless, they have some real dogs there in that secondary. And Vaughn is definitely in that group. 83 defensive grade, a pressure, a defensive stop, targeted 10. And I repeat, 10 times, allowing only 2 receptions for 18 yards. And on top of that, he had an interception and 3 pass breakups. Well done, Vaughn, because, the whole entire Utah team did very well. And I actually realized I needed to update the Utah logo. You guys know how I end up always making like one graphical error per video, but we caught it in the middle of this one. But regardless, doing that well, allowing 20% completion percentage on top of having interception and 3 pass breakups, that's just fantastic. It really is. So I did top 42 corners, and it's just like technically 41, but it's just insane. It really is insane for the fact that, we're still finding corners who are making unbelievable performances and, might have to get to like a top 50 and stuff. And, man, I don't get paid enough for this, but I end up loving it nonetheless. Then we got Caleb Tiernan. Yeah, we have 6 stars this week, which is ridiculous. But Caleb Tiernan did an absolutely fantastic job. He's been listed quite a few times on my own studs and duds list, which again, it's a far bigger list. I go through every single game, and I end up pretty much writing down the guys who are winners and losers, and I try to, accumulate the best and the worst for this video. But Tiernan's been on there plenty of times. He ended up having a 93 pass blocking grade, allowing 0 pressures versus Illinois. Illinois has a really, really good defense, and he played 94 total reps. I think 60 of that were pass blocking reps. That is ridiculous. First off, Northwestern left tackle, you get excited. Then you see 6'7", 329, you get excited from Northwestern. And then you add on top of that versus one of the best defenses he faced the entire year, he allowed 0 pressures. And it's not unlike 20 pass blocking reps. We're talking about over 50. Well done, Caleb. Honestly, fantastic job. I'm going to be so excited to watch him in depth, and I really do hope that this guy ends up being one of those underrated guys who ends up really rising in the offseason process. But we have a lot of other guys to talk about, so let's not waste too much time here. Taj Brooks starting out, I call him Ashton Genty at home, ended up having 24 carries for 199 yards, 3 touchdowns, 3 missed tackles forced, 2 receptions on 2 targets for 35 yards as well. So grand total 26 touches, 234 yards, and 3 touchdowns. And, the one thing different about Taj Brooks and Ashton Genty is the quantity of missed tackles forced. I will say that's my one concern with Taj, is that I don't see that being as high as what I would expect for people who are trying to say that Taj Brooks is 10% worse or even 20% worse than Genty. We're talking about Genty as a supreme being here. Taj Brooks is fantastic, but again, I want to set the record straight. I'm not going to say that Taj Brooks is remotely close to that tier, but he is someone who I really, really like and someone who I'm very happy to give his flowers. Then we have Kenneth Grant here, defensive interior out of Michigan. He ended up doing a fantastic job this week, kicking Ohio State's ass, which sucks because I'm an Ohio State fan. You guys know how that is. But 5 pressures, 2 defensive stops, and an 83 defensive grade. You could also talk about Mason Graham in this equation. He had 2 pressures and I believe 5 defensive stops. So kind of like a flip. It might have been 3 pressures. But regardless, both of the defensive tiers for Michigan were probably going to be the primary factors as to why the whole entire offense didn't do well, but we have plenty of time to talk about the guys who failed for Ohio State. Then we have a couple of Baylor guys, Devin Bobby and Bryson Washington. I ended up going in person to this game to watch these guys play. Shout out also to the other running back, Dawson Pendergrass for Baylor. Baylor has an extremely underrated team. Sawyer Robinson, Monterey Baldwin I actually ended up doing an NCAA dynasty, not fantasy, dynasty. And Baldwin was that guy who I always threw to. Yeah, it's 98 speed. You guys know what's up. But the thing is, they used him properly. They used Baldwin, and they always threw to him in the slot fade, and that's why he ended up going off early in this game. And, Baylor's a very underrated team, and I'm very excited to see if, I assume Sawyer is going to stay, and I hope that some other big playmakers are going to stay as well. I don't know if Campbell Barrington has an extra year of eligibility, but Baylor ended up starting out slow, and they were very close. They were 2 big plays away from beating Colorado. Like, very, very good team. But regardless, for these 2 players, Devin Bobby, 79 defensive grade, a defensive stop, 3 targets, 1 reception allowed for 22 yards, and 2 interceptions. Granted, I believe one of the first ones was an absolute shanked throw by Jalen Daniels, but regardless, Devin Bobby having a fantastic game this past week. Bryson Washington, another week of this dude being on here. Fantastic player. 28 carries, 192 yards, 2 touchdowns, 3 missed tackles forced, 1 completion on 1 target for 14 yards as well. Grand total, 29 touches. 206 yards and 2 touchdowns. So great job there for him. He's been consistently on this list, and I always like to give guys who are consistently performing the kudos they deserve. Torrey Cox Jr. is next, corner out of Illinois. I've given a lot of shout outs to Illinois defensive players, which is also why I loved how Caleb Tiernan played, but he ended up having a defensive stop, 4 targets, 2 completions, 17 yards, interception, and a pass breakup. 73 defensive grade overall. Just a good performance there by Torrey Cox. Then we have Devin Turner, defensive back at Northwestern. Can you tell that I ended up studying this game together? Because, well, we have Illinois and Northwestern players bunched together. So Devin Turner, defensive back, he ended up having a 92 defensive grade. He only had 1 target his way, which he allowed 6 yards on, but he was the recipient of 2 interceptions as well. So good job for Devin Turner. Again, 2 interception game, even if they're not directly targeted at you, shows that you know what the hell you are doing. Then we have Aiden Lowry, I think. I didn't end up watching this game live, so... And then also watching games in all 22, you don't get to be able to hear people's voices, be able to pronounce names. But running back out of Illinois, he had 12 carries for 172 yards and 3 touchdowns. And it wasn't like he had a 99-yard run. I think his biggest run was like 60. So even so, like 11 carries for like 111 yards and like a couple touchdowns. That's still a fantastic performance. So good job for Aiden there. Then Amari and Hampton coming right after, another running back here out of UNC. 22 carries, 185 yards, and a touchdown. On top of that, 4 receptions, 5 targets for 77 yards and another touchdown. Grand total, 26 touches. Let's do the quick maths here. Was that 250, 262, and 2 touchdowns. Then we have Johnny Walker Jr., edge rusher out of Missouri. 7 pressures, 3 defensive stops, and a 76 defensive grade. Same thing for Khalil Diggs, edge out of Syracuse. 7 pressures, 3 stops, but we're going to go the dyslexic route and go 67 defensive grade. So, fantastic performance there for both of those edge rushers. If you guys don't know, 5 pressures is usually where I start marking you down as a winner of the week, unless you have a multitude of other factors that could end up boosting your grade, like good amount of stops, as well as interceptions, pass breakups, etc. Now, this is where it gets a little crazy, because as you can see, the top and bottom options here allowed me to put a lot more players in here than what I was originally planning on. But Abdul Carter and Danny Dennis Sutton, like, both those guys had fantastic weeks. Both of them had 6 pressures. Abdul had 4 stops. Danny had 3, or some people say Denis, but Dennis Sutton had 3 stops. So Abdul Carter got 90 defensive grade. Sutton ended up having 85. So just a really well-rounded performance from both edge rushers this past week as they head towards the Big Ten title game. Then you got Braden Swinson here, another edge rusher at LSU. One of those guys who I really like. He ends up popping up every time I watch LSU. I know that my guy James Foster loves him as well, so I'm going to give him his flowers right there. 89 defensive grade, 6 pressures, 4 defensive stops. Then we have Whit Weeks, another LSU defender, and he's been on here a couple times as well. He ended up having 4 pressures, 7 defensive stops, targeted twice, allowing 1 reception for only 4 yards. Jalen Travis, left tackle out of Iowa State. He had a 90 pass blocking grade with 0 pressures allowed this past week. If you guys do not know, the only time I really include offensive tackles on this list is if they have a 90 plus on their pass blocking grade. Like, that's just me. I think that that's what I value the most, and I think that that's going to be, when you end up comparing them against a lot of other players who are more productive, it's the easiest way to, set that threshold to be able to really give kudos to the tackles who have a dominant week. Then we have Kendall Daniels, corner or defensive back out of Oklahoma State, 74 defensive grade, 5 pressures, 5 stops, 1 reception allowed on 1 target for 2 yards. Again, just very well-rounded performance. Trey Washington, defensive back out of Ole Miss, had a 90 defensive grade. He had a defensive stop, targeted twice, allowing 0 receptions, obviously 0 yards, and he had an interception and a pass breakup. David Bailey's following that, edge rusher out of Stanford. Ended up talking about him in a 2026 mock draft. That was way too early, but he ended up having 8 pressures, a defensive stop, and an 82 defensive grade. CJ Allen is next, and he ended up having an 86 defensive grade. He had a pressure, 8 defensive stops, 2 receptions allowed on 4 targets for 34 yards, and a pass breakup. Well done, CJ Allen. Then we ended up having Corey Robinson II, left tackle out of Georgia Tech. Versus University of Georgia, he had a 90 pass blocking grade and 0 pressures allowed. I mean, talking about literally stuffing Mikael Williams and, just a really, it was a down week for the Georgia defense. And Corey Robinson, I will need to hear from my boy Richard Lelly as to whether he really thinks this guy is truly NFL translatable, because Richard knows his team better than probably anybody I know. But then we have Colorado. So I already mentioned Travis Hunter, but I had to put him as a superstar of the week, right? But we have 4 different players I want to include here. The first one's Carter Stoutmeyer, and he's a defensive back. He had a 91 defensive grade, 5 defensive stops, a forced fumble, and on 7 targets, he allowed 3 receptions for 15 yards and had 2 pass breakups. And then we also have to mention DJ McKinney, cornerback out of Colorado. He was on my top 41 corner list. He was actually a top 10 corner on that. 74 defensive grade, targeted 9 times, allowed 3 receptions for 13 yards, had an interception and a pass breakup as well. Then we have to mention Shedeur Sanders. You guys always complain that I don't put Shedeur on here, but he had a fantastic week this week. 42 throws, 34 completions, 438 yards, 5 touchdowns, 1 interception, 3 big time throws, 1 turnover-worthy play, 4 carries, 30 yards. Really, really, really solid. And again, when you throw big time throws, my big goal is 3-1. That's the ratio I really want to see in a dominant performance. Doing 5-1 absolutely is acceptable for me. Then we have LaJohntay Wester. He is really, really, really fun. I know that I've been getting a lot of love in the chat for him, but 11 targets, 11 receptions, 172 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So really, really solid performance right there. It pretty much was him as well as Travis Hunter on offense being the main guys for Shedeur Sanders. Now let's talk about the guys we don't want to talk about. Starting out with Jonah Coleman. He ended up announcing he's going back to school, and unfortunately, I think that I fully support this based on his recent performance. He had 11 carries for, 3 yards and a touchdown and a fumble, had 1 missed tackle forced, 1 reception on 2 targets for 10 yards, having a grand total of 12 touches for 13 yards, a touchdown, and a fumble. So at least he broke 1 yard per touch. But bottom line, when you're trying to compete in this running back class, that's very, very deep. Having a performance like that requires you to go back to school. Now let's talk about the stock down, the rest of the dudes, the rest of the duds of the week. Start with Will Howard. Obviously we know that Ohio State now has been pretty much kicked out of the Big Ten championship. That sucks. If I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure. I'm forgetting who the other contender is, but it's Oregon. It's Oregon versus Penn State. But regardless, Will Howard, I'm just very, very, very surprised because he's a player that I really like, but this is just not a performance like him. 33 throws, 19 completions, 175 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, 0 big time throws, 2 turnover-worthy plays, 4 carries for 10 yards and a fumble. The reason I say it's not like him is because I expect a minimum of 1 big time throw. He has some beautiful sideline passes that I really do think, if more consistent, could be legitimately NFL level. So it just sucks to see him end off his regular season like this. TreVeyon Henderson still needs to get a little bit of flack, though. 10 carries for 21 yards, 0 missed tackles forced, 2 touches on 2 receptions, 2 targets, 25 yards, grand total 12 touches for 46 yards, 0 missed tackles forced. You just got to be able to do better than that. That's a big reason why this team, I do believe, lost, is because, even Quinshon Judkins didn't do that fantastic of a job, but these guys were just not able to move the chains. Then we have Mello Dotson. He's not really a player that I needed to include in this. He was the guy who deserved to be on this list the least because he had 70 defensive grade, a defensive stop, allowed 4 receptions on 6 targets for 47 yards, a touchdown, and a pass breakup. But when I saw him in person, I was a bit underwhelmed. And I have him listed as barely a fringe guy at the moment, but at the same time, I think that's the point where I start getting a little bit uncomfortable. I think about the guys who I ended up falling in love with last year that, I didn't really have guys that were 70 grades, like, because I believe he's like 70 or like 70.25. I didn't have guys that were 70 grades that I ended up saying I fell in love with. And I do like Mello Dotson, but it was the guys who had 75 plus that I really had that faith in. So I'm thinking of DJ McKinney this year. And then like guys who are really close to that in that 74 to 72 range. And you think about what's his name? I'm tripping. But regardless, you got Chandler Rivers this year or Jacob Parrish, but guys who I really do like, but they have some certain limitations. So I just don't know if like Mello Dotson's gonna be a guy I want to stick my my claim into. There's Chandler Rivers right here, and Chandler Rivers didn't have a good week at all. But Chandler, I think, is gonna be a little bit more unique in terms of the role he's going to play. But I do think there is a more solidified route for success for Chandler in the NFL. He had a 66 defensive grade, speaking of, for 2 defensive stops, 5 targets, 4 receptions allowed for 62 yards and a touchdown. Just, it's not an awful game, but it's certainly not one that you really want to end the year off on. Kyle Kennard's next. Just not a good week, man. 0 pressures, 0 stops, 62 defensive grade. Pretty damn lucky that they ended up winning that game. But, having 0 production in your final regular season game, just not it for me. Tacario Davis is next. He's been on this down list quite a few times. And this week, 38 defensive grade at 2 targets, 2 receptions, 70 yards, and a defensive stop. Just like, I didn't watch the game yet in all 22, but this is a list that basically comprises all the performances of the week. And Tacario's just been really struggling. He's been really struggling this year. And so I don't know if he ends up going back. I don't think it would be a bad decision for him, but I do think he might have a role of a defensive back in the NFL rather than just being a pure corner. Luther Burden declared for the NFL draft, and I'm not going to say he shouldn't have by any means because he's getting still a ton of love from a ton of people, but he had 2 targets, 1 reception, 11 yards, and a drop in his final regular season game. I'm forgetting if they're going to be scheduled for a bowl game, but just bottom line, not necessarily what you want to put out there as, the final taste in your mouth, so to speak, for him at Missouri. But at the end of the day, not really like a horrific performance. It's just, Missouri this year has been so underwhelming. I'm not going to put the blame on Luther Burden. Then you got Billy Bowman here. Billy Bowman has been the definition of hot and cold. He had a 42 defensive grade, a defensive stop, 5 receptions allowed on 7 targets for 80 yards and a touchdown. Again, just a really bad performance as a coverage player, but this dude definitely has his high-level plays. You're going to really need to work him into your rotation, but I do think Billy Bowman has a path to success in the NFL. He's a really solid player. Evan Stewart, wide receiver out of Oregon's next. 4 targets, 1 reception, 4 yards. Here's the kicker. He almost was the dud of the week, 2 drops. So, the team's still working. The team's still cooking. They're going to be in the championship pretty much. That's my prediction. They're going to be there. They're going to win the championship. But, you just can't have 2 drops. Like, that's a big thing for me. You can definitely not have more drops and receptions, in my opinion. But regardless, for a wide receiver people think is like a fringe day 2 guy, you got to have at least sure hands. Then you got Malachi Starks to end this off. It's not like legitimately an ass game, but it's just not good. 62 defensive grade, defensive stop, 7 targets, 6 receptions, 86 yards. For a defensive back, you're going to be credited with a little bit more of the yardage than maybe some boundary corners would. But regardless, a lot of performances that were a bit more up in the air. But I really do love these players. You guys know that. I love you guys. And, obviously we're going to continue this through the bowl weeks and such. But, it's going to be weird not doing this every single week. But that also means that we're going to have more time for some more other shows, some more theories, and all that stuff. So stay tuned for that. I love you. See you on the far side. Peace.